My name is Emily Robinson. I'm a senior lecturer in politics at the University of Sussex. I guess I've always been interested in history. I was one of those sort of kids who, watched Time Team all the time, and then I went to university to study history. Although at the time I was mainly studying medieval and early modern history, and I thought that's what I would do. I was quite interested in the English Civil War, that kind of thing. And it was only when I graduated that I became more interested in politics as a citizen, really. And I started working in think tanks and sort of being interested in democracy and the processes of British politics. And it was through that I got more interested in British political history, modern British political history. And then that's what I decided to pursue. I think timescale really is one of the main differences that I noticed. In a think tank, you're turning things around really quickly. You're looking for answers, whereas academics have got a little bit more time to sort of explore something in depth and to sort of ask questions that don't necessarily seem to be leading to a policy solution or whatever. And I preferred that sort of more exploratory, more kind of curiosity-driven kind of nature of working, really. I also like spending time with students, and helping them to understand what's so interesting about it from my point of view. Well, I think, at the very least, we need to understand the way in which politicians themselves are mobilising history. This is an ever-present kind of point of reference. You can't understand what's going on in the Labour Party at the minute without understanding Labour Party history from the 70s, at least, onwards. I think there's this sort of constant reference point to, for instance, the 1930s are always being invoked as a sort of, we don't want to go back to the 1930s, and that was important in the post-war period, but it's also important now. We saw this brought out several times against George Osborne, for instance, and without knowing what's meant by that shorthand, the 1930s, we're not going to know what they're really getting at. But I also think that we need to maintain a sort of critical eye on that as well, the way in which austerity, for instance, and the sort of blitz spirit gets mobilised. We can recognise that while also recognising that it's that the sort of myth of that is very different from the reality that that we would look at if we were looking at the history of that period. And so seeing the way that history sort of operates as a constant rhetorical device justification, I think is really important. Well, I think there are a number of sort of different answers to that. One is just about skills, analysing sources, being able to sort of differentiate between different accounts and sort of pick through evidence. That is always going to be really important in terms of critical thinking, and perhaps even more, in an era of fake news, we need to be constantly aware of where our material's coming from. And I think that history as a discipline is a really good training in that. In terms of knowing about British political history in particular, I think it's just really hard to understand sort of how things can change if you don't understand how they did change in the past. That the settlement that we have now, whether we're thinking about the constitution, the economy, all of this, isn't the only way it could be, or isn't the only way that it has been, or isn't. I think also one of the things that I find particularly interesting in studying history is looking at the things that didn't happen, the sort of paths not taken, those sort of possibilities that were for whatever reason not taken up, closed down, but that they could be reopened. Just seeing that history, the processes of history are always kind of contentious and open, and I think realising that that's how things work makes the present seem more open. What's been particularly interesting about thinking about this as a sort of period, to teach about, apart from anything else, is how quickly things are moving and how surprising things are on a sort of ongoing basis. So a lot of the kind of models, ways of thinking about British politics, the shape of sort of political history, have been disrupted by the past couple of years. And it doesn't really feel like that's at an end yet. I think as political historians, as political scientists, it's been a constant challenge to kind of not only keep on top of developments, but think about what that does to our understanding of earlier periods, of the things that are entrenched in the things that aren't, the things that looked settled questions and now suddenly aren't again. So yeah, I think it's been a particularly challenging period as an academic as much as a citizen, and who knows what's going to happen next, I guess.